I can't leave her behind. The thought barely whispered through the rain as a small white shape appeared beyond the chain-link gate of Camp Lejeune, dragging itself across the wet asphalt, leaving streaks of mud and something darker against the pale gray concrete. The dawn was barely breaking, a thin mist hovering over the perimeter fence, the cold air carrying the sharp tang of salt from the nearby Atlantic and the faint aroma of diesel from the military vehicles parked in neat rows. Every step the dog took was measured, painful, deliberate, but determined, a quiet rhythm of survival that seemed impossible given the state of his limbs. Ghost, the white German shepherd, moved with a purpose no passerby could see, his amber eyes flicking to the shadows of the guard towers, then down to the boots of Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks, who had just stepped outside to begin his early morning patrol. Isaiah froze, squinting through the fog, trying to understand if his mind was playing tricks on him. A dog, alone, soaked, and exhausted, was lurching toward him, dragging itself inch by inch, its breaths ragged and visible in the chill. The small object tied to Ghost's worn collar shifted with each motion, a hint of blue and white that caught the faint reflection of the overhead lights. Isaiah knelt instinctively, lowering his hand without breaking eye contact, feeling the pulse of urgency that emanated from the animal, a silent plea that transcended barking or growls. The mist settled over the base like a blanket, yet the wind carried the faint whisper of the surf and the soft creaking of a distant watchtower. Ghost's coat, damp and matted, glistened under the weak light, flecks of mud embedding themselves in the tufts of fur along his legs and chest. His muscles, taut beneath the pale fur, shivered with exertion as he dragged himself closer, stopping occasionally to rest, then pressing on, as if the mission could not be paused, the responsibility too great. Isaiah's eyes followed every motion, recognizing the discipline that only AK-9 trained for service could exhibit, the instinctive vigilance that refused to waver despite the obvious fatigue. There was no fear in Ghost's gaze, only an unspoken message carried through the trembling tilt of his head, the subtle lift of his tail, and the flicker of his ears. Each breath he took was a silent testament to resilience and loyalty, a history embedded in muscle memory from countless exercises long past, from missions that Isaiah himself had led and survived. The sergeant's heart tightened as he noticed the slight unevenness in Ghost's stride, the small scrape along his left front paw, the subtle strain in his hindquarters, but the dog did not slow, did not falter. It was as if the will of another being had taken hold, guiding him forward with a certainty that Isaiah felt in his chest. The metallic clink of the object on the collar caught Isaiah's attention, the small dog tag swaying gently, and the fragment of blue cloth beneath it hinted at something fragile, something that belonged not to him, not to the base, but to a life waiting somewhere beyond the mist and fences. Isaiah reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against the wet fur, and Ghost responded with a small, urgent nudge, a physical insistence that spoke louder than words. The wind carried the distant sound of gulls, the faint hum of generators, and the soft slap of water against sand at the edge of the base. Each sensory detail sharpened the moment, grounding it in reality, yet elevating it to something cinematic, something almost sacred in its stillness. Ghost's chest heaved with effort, his eyes never leaving Isaiah's, conveying an understanding that the sergeant could not yet comprehend fully, the gravity of the message wrapped in fur and instinct. As the first hints of sunrise began to color the fog a pale gold, the scene was set for what neither man nor dog would forget, a meeting born from endurance, trust, and a call that transcended the ordinary. Isaiah tightened his jacket against the damp chill, knelt lower to meet Ghost at eye level, and whispered, "I see you. I'm here," not knowing that these simple words would mark the beginning of a journey neither of them expected, a path through mystery, redemption, and the quiet miracles that sometimes arrive on four paws, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of those who recognize them. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks had learned long ago that panic wastes breath, so he did not shout when Ghost collapsed against his boots. He moved the way Marines are trained to move when the world narrows into one necessary task: steady hands, clear eyes, no wasted motion. He keyed the radio on his shoulder and called for the veterinary unit, his voice low enough not to frighten the dog, but firm enough to cut through the sleepy static of the Morning Post. The guard at the booth stepped out, young and pale with surprise, one hand hovering uselessly near his belt until Isaiah gave him a single look that said move with purpose. Within minutes, the quiet gate came alive with controlled urgency. A medical cart rolled across the wet pavement, its wheels hissing through shallow puddles. Dr. Emily Carter arrived with a field blanket tucked under one arm and a small emergency kit in the other, her dark blue jacket half-zipped, her brown hair pulled back in a hurried knot. She had the calm face of someone who had seen frightened animals, wounded animals, and animals that had given up. But when she saw Ghost, that calm changed. Not broke. Changed. Her eyes softened first, then sharpened. "White shepherd," she murmured, kneeling beside him. "Male. Trained posture. Look at his eyes." Isaiah did not look away from the dog. He came straight to the gate. Emily slid her fingers carefully along Ghost's shoulder, then down the length of his front legs, checking for heat, tension, and tremors. Ghost winced, but did not pull back. He kept his muzzle angled toward Isaiah, as if the Marine had already become the one safe point in a world that had tilted too far. Rain tapped lightly on the brim of Isaiah's cover. It ran down the deep brown skin of his cheek and gathered along the line of his jaw, but he barely noticed. The dog's breathing mattered more. The little blue cloth tied to the collar mattered more. The way Ghost kept trying to lift his head whenever Emily's hand neared it mattered more. "We need to get him inside," Emily said. Slowly, Isaiah eased both arms beneath Ghost, one under the chest, one supporting the hips, and felt how light he was. Beneath the wet fur. Too light for a working canine. Too light for a dog that should have been all muscle and discipline. Ghost gave one soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a sigh, then rested his muzzle against Isaiah's sleeve. That small surrender reached somewhere the sergeant had kept locked for years. He had carried men before. He had carried gear, grief, folded flags, and silence. But the weight of this dog felt different. It felt like a message placed into his arms before he had agreed to receive it. They moved through the base as the morning began to stir. Barracks lights blinked on behind rain-streaked windows. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle call floated thinly through the damp air, rising and falling like memory. A few Marines stopped in their tracks as Isaiah passed, their faces shifting from curiosity to quiet concern. No one joked. No one asked the wrong question. Something about Ghost's stillness commanded respect. Inside the veterinary clinic, the air smelled of antiseptic, clean towels, and warm metal. Emily directed Isaiah to a padded examination table near the back, away from the brighter lights. "Lay him here. Keep your hand where he can feel you." Isaiah obeyed without a word. Ghost's paws trembled against the towel. His amber eyes tracked every movement, not wild, not empty, but focused, painfully focused, as if he had reached safety and still could not allow himself to rest. Emily checked his gums, listened to his heartbeat, and wrapped a warm towel around his ribs. Dehydrated. Exhausted. Scrapes, strain, exposure. Nothing I can call final until I run more checks. Isaiah heard what she did not say. The dog had been through a long night. Maybe more than one. Emily reached for the collar. Ghost's whole body tensed. His ears flattened. His lips did not curl, and he did not snap, but he pressed his chin down over the blue cloth with all the strength he had left. Isaiah leaned closer. "Easy, boy. Nobody is taking it from you." Ghost blinked once, slow and heavy. Isaiah placed his palm against the dog's neck, feeling the fast flutter of life beneath the fur. "He is guarding it," Emily whispered. Isaiah nodded. "Then we treat it like evidence." The word hung in the small room. Evidence. Not trash. Not accident. Not coincidence. Emily took a pair of blunt scissors and worked with the patience of a person untying a prayer from a closed fist. The knot was tight, wet, and stiff from the rain. Beneath it, the worn collar showed old scratches and a faded metal plate with marks too dirty to read. As Emily loosened the blue cloth, something small slipped free and tapped against the steel tray with a sound so delicate that everyone in the room seemed to stop breathing. It was a child's plastic bracelet, pale purple, with tiny letter beads threaded around it. Some letters were missing. The ones that remained spelled one name clearly enough. Lily. Isaiah felt the room tilt, not from fear, but recognition. Years fell away in a single heartbeat. A narrow street overseas. A doorway. A child's shoe in the dust. His own voice calling for one more minute that never came. He closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them before the memory could take him. Ghost stirred at the sound of the bracelet touching metal. Weak as he was, he lifted his head and looked directly at Isaiah. Not pleading for food. Not pleading for rest. Pleading for time. Emily unfolded the damp blue cloth with careful fingers. Ink had bled into the fibers, but 3 words remained, uneven and small, written in purple marker. Lily is cold. The clinic fell silent, except for the rain against the window and the fragile breathing of the white dog who had dragged that message through the dark. The 3 words on the cloth seemed too small to hold so much fear, yet they changed the air inside the clinic as surely as if someone had opened the door and let winter walk in. Lily is cold. Isaiah stared at the purple ink until the letters blurred at the edges. He had heard radio calls that sounded calm while lives trembled beneath them. He had read coordinates scribbled on torn paper in the middle of storms. He knew the shape of a message written by someone who did not have time to explain. This was not a prank. This was not a lost bracelet from some roadside ditch. This was a child reaching through a dog. Emily Carter took a slow breath and placed the cloth on a sterile pad, careful not to smear what remained of the ink. "We need command," she said quietly. Isaiah was already reaching for his radio. His thumb pressed the side button, and his voice came out steady, though something behind his ribs had begun to pound. "This is Staff Sergeant Brooks. I need Captain Reed at the veterinary clinic immediately. Possible missing child connection." Repeat, possible missing child connection. Static answered first, then a pause. Then the watch officer replied, sharper now, fully awake. "Copy that. Captain Reed is being notified." Ghost made a faint movement on the table. His front paw slid forward, claws catching softly against the towel. Isaiah placed his hand near the dog's muzzle, and Ghost pressed his nose against the Marine's knuckles with a kind of exhausted urgency. He was not asking for comfort. He was confirming something. Isaiah felt it. Emily must have felt it too, because she glanced from the bracelet to the dog and whispered, "He knows that name." Isaiah nodded once. "Say it again." Emily looked uncertain. "Isaiah, please." She leaned closer to Ghost, keeping her voice gentle. "Lily." The reaction was immediate. Ghost lifted his head an inch from the towel, ears trembling, eyes suddenly brighter with pain and purpose. His body was too tired to rise, but his will tried anyway. His paw scraped forward again. One short drag, then another. Then he turned his head toward the clinic door. Isaiah felt the old chill travel down his back. Not from the rain, from recognition. A trained dog did not waste strength like that. A trained dog pointed. Captain Marcus Reed arrived less than 5 minutes later, still buttoning the top of his field jacket, his silver hair damp at the temples, his face carrying the hard calm of a man accustomed to waking inside trouble. 2 military police officers followed him in, both silent when they saw the white shepherd on the table. Reed looked at the cloth, the bracelet, the dog, then Isaiah. "Tell me exactly what happened." Isaiah gave it to him clean. Time, location, condition, object tied to collar, words on cloth, dog's response to the name. No emotion added. No guesswork. Just truth, because truth carried weight on its own. Reed listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening only when Emily pointed to the bracelet. "The beads spell Lily," she said, and the message was protected inside the cloth. Not accidental. Someone tied it there on purpose, or someone helped the dog carry it. One of the military police officers shifted uneasily. Could be an old missing person case. Isaiah looked at him. The ink is fresh enough to bleed in rain. The room quieted again. Reed turned toward the office phone mounted near the cabinet. "Contact Onslow County. Missing child reports within 20 miles. Any girl named Lily, Lillian, Liliana, anything close." Now, the younger officer moved at once. Emily returned to Ghost, checking the warm fluid line and adjusting the blanket around him. "He needs rest," she said. "His body is running on nothing." Ghost heard the word rest and rejected it with a low, broken breath. He tried to push up on his front legs. His muscles quivered. His paws slipped. Isaiah caught him before he could fall off the table. No. Easy." Ghost's gaze locked onto the door again. Not random. Not fearful. Fixed. Isaiah followed that gaze and saw only the hallway, wet footprints, and the gray slice of morning beyond the window. But Ghost saw something else. A path. A memory. A scent fading with every minute of rain. The phone call lasted just under 2 minutes. When the officer turned back, his face had changed. "Sir," he said, voice lower now. "County has an active missing child alert. Lily Parker, 7 years old. Reported missing late last night from a rural property north of Piney Green Road. Search was suspended before dawn because of weather and visibility." Emily closed her eyes briefly. Reed looked at Isaiah. "How far is that from our eastern perimeter?" "About 6 miles by road," Isaiah said. "Less through the service woods." The numbers sat heavy between them. 6 miles. Through rain. Across ditches, brush, gravel, and cold earth. Ghost had not wandered to the base. He had chosen it. He had dragged that message with whatever strength was left in him because somewhere in his fading memory, a Marine base meant help. Reed stepped closer to the table, his voice softer than before. "Can he travel?" Emily looked at Ghost, then at Isaiah, then back to the dog whose whole body was trembling toward the door. "Medically, I should say no." She paused, and the rain ticked against the glass like a clock running out. "But if he knows where she is, keeping him here may cost more than moving him." Isaiah did not wait for anyone to make it sound cleaner than it was. He bent close to Ghost, his forehead nearly touching the damp fur between the dog's ears. "You found us," he whispered. "Now show me why." Ghost answered with one weak breath, one paw stretched toward the door, and a stare so full of purpose that even Captain Reed stopped looking at him like an injured animal and started looking at him like a Marine with a mission still unfinished. They prepared Ghost for the trail, as if preparing a wounded soldier for one last mile. Emily wrapped his sore paws in soft medical bandages, secured a light support sling beneath his hips, and checked the warm fluid line one final time before removing it with hands so gentle that even the room seemed to hold still. Isaiah stood beside the examination table, watching every breath the white shepherd took, every flicker of those amber eyes toward the door. Outside, the rain had softened into a cold mist, the kind that clung to windshields and made distance look uncertain. Captain Reed authorized a small search team, quiet and fast, no lights unless needed, no sirens, no wasted noise. He had already spoken with Onslow County, and Deputy Alan Briggs arrived at the base less than 10 minutes later in a county vehicle speckled with mud from the rural roads. Briggs was in his early 40s, with a tired face, sandy hair, and the cautious expression of a man who had spent too many nights chasing reports that ended in confusion. He stepped into the clinic and looked at Ghost first, then at the cloth, then at Isaiah. "You were telling me the dog came here from the Parker property?" he asked. Isaiah did not blink. "I am telling you he brought us her name." Briggs rubbed a hand over his mouth, glancing toward Captain Reed. "With respect, Captain, we have search volunteers already working the main roads. A hurt dog may have picked this up anywhere." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of doubt, not as if he understood the words, but as if he felt the weight behind them. His paw moved once against the towel. 3 short scrapes, then 2 slower ones. Emily noticed first. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait." The room froze. Ghost did it again. 3 quick scratches, 2 slow. Then he stared at Isaiah. Isaiah felt his breath catch. It was not random. He had heard rhythms like that before in K-9 drills. Quiet signals used when noise was not safe. Trained responses shaped by repetition and trust. "That is not pain movement," he said. "That is a signal." Briggs looked uncertain. "A signal for what?" Isaiah crouched close to Ghost, lowering his voice until it was almost part of the rain. "Search." Ghost's ears twitched. "Find." The dog pushed his front paw forward again, 3 times quick, 2 times slow, then turned his nose toward the east side of the base. No one spoke for a moment. Even Briggs seemed to feel something shift, the difference between theory and witness. Captain Reed looked through the clinic window toward the line of pines beyond the perimeter road. "Eastern Service Woods," he said. "If he came through there, he avoided the highway." Isaiah nodded. "A trained dog would." Briggs sighed, but there was less resistance in it now. The official search grid started near the house and along Piney Green Road. The woods are rough. Low ground, drainage ditches, old maintenance paths. Visibility was poor before sunrise. "Then that is where a child could be missed," Isaiah said. The words came out calm, but they carried the iron edge of memory. For a second, the clinic faded, and he was back in another place. Years ago, hearing a child's name over a radio that kept cutting in and out, seeing dust in the air, feeling the terrible distance between knowing someone needed help and reaching them in time. He had spent years trying not to remember the exact sound of being too late. Ghost looked at him, and the past loosened its grip just enough for Isaiah to breathe. Emily touched Isaiah's arm lightly. He cannot walk 6 miles. He will not have to, Isaiah said. He reached for a field harness from the equipment shelf, the kind used to stabilize working dogs during transport. Emily helped him secure it around Ghost's chest, patting the straps so they would not press against sore places. Ghost did not resist. He watched Isaiah with solemn trust, as if the transfer of burden had been understood. You brought the message. I will carry the rest. Outside, the small team gathered near a tan utility vehicle. Isaiah, Emily, Captain Reed, Deputy Briggs, and 2 military police Marines. The base was fully waking now, but their corner of it seemed held apart by something quieter than orders. The sky over North Carolina had turned the color of pewter, and the pine trees beyond the fence stood dark and dripping, their branches moving gently in the coastal wind. Isaiah lifted Ghost into the back of the vehicle and climbed in beside him. The dog immediately shifted his nose toward the east, past the veterinary clinic, past the motor pool, past the service gate where fog still hung low over the road. Briggs climbed into the passenger seat with a map folded across his knees. If this dog is wrong, we lose time. Isaiah placed one hand against Ghost's shoulder, feeling the fragile heat of him beneath the blanket. If he is right, she gains it. Captain Reed looked at Briggs in the rearview mirror. We move. The vehicle rolled out slowly, tires whispering over wet pavement, then crunching onto the gravel service road that led toward the eastern perimeter. Ghost raised his head despite the effort, nostrils trembling as the world opened around him. The smell of rain-soaked pine filled the air, mixed with mud, salt, and the faint metallic scent of the fence line. At the gate, the guard lifted the barrier, and the vehicle passed from the order of the base into the uncertainty of the woods. The road narrowed almost immediately, swallowed by trees and morning fog. Branches brushed softly against the sides. Water pooled in deep ruts. Every few hundred feet, Isaiah watched Ghost's ears, his nose, the direction of his eyes. The dog was reading a story written in scent, a story the rain had tried to erase, but had not fully taken. Then, less than a mile in, Ghost gave a sudden, strained whine and pushed himself upright. His paw struck the floor of the vehicle. 3 quick taps. Too slow. Isaiah looked ahead. On the right, almost hidden beneath wet leaves, an old maintenance trail disappeared into the pines. Briggs leaned forward, frowning at the map. That path is not on here. Ghost tapped again, weaker this time, but certain. Isaiah opened the door before anyone told him to wait. Cold mist rushed in. He stepped down into the mud, turned back, and gathered Ghost carefully into his arms. The dog's nose pointed toward the trail, unwavering. Somewhere beyond those trees, beneath the wet silence of morning, Lily Parker was either waiting or slipping farther away, and Ghost had just told them which way hope still lived. The old maintenance trail seemed to have been forgotten by everyone except the trees. It wound beneath low pine branches and through patches of wet underbrush, disappearing and reappearing beneath carpets of needles turned dark by rain. Isaiah carried Ghost close against his chest, one arm beneath the dog's ribs and the other supporting his hindquarters, feeling each small tremor pass through the white shepherd's body like distant thunder. Ghost was warm beneath the blanket, but not strong. His head rested against Isaiah's shoulder until a scent caught him, and then he would lift his nose into the air, nostrils trembling, eyes fixed ahead with a focus that made the whole team slow down and listen. Behind them, Emily walked with her medical pack held tight against her side, careful where she stepped. Captain Reed moved with measured discipline, scanning the woods, while Deputy Briggs followed with his radio raised now and then, trying to keep contact with county dispatch through the trees. The 2 military police Marines stayed wide, not aggressive, not loud, simply present, letting the silence do its work. After a quarter mile, the trail dipped into a stretch of low ground where rainwater gathered in shallow pools. The mud sucked at their boots. Mosquitoes hovered above the water. The air smelled of pine sap, wet leaves, and cold earth. Ghost stirred in Isaiah's arms and made a soft sound, barely more than breath. Isaiah stopped at once. "What is it, boy?" Ghost turned his head to the left, toward a narrow ditch half hidden by tall grass. Isaiah stepped closer. Emily raised her hand, asking everyone to pause. In the ditch, caught against a branch, was something small and pink. Briggs moved first, crouching carefully and pulling it free with gloved fingers. A child's sneaker. Mud covered the sole. One lace was missing. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even the rain seemed lighter there. Briggs turned the shoe in his hands, and his doubt finally drained from his face. "This matches the description," he said quietly. "The mother said Lily was wearing pink sneakers." Isaiah looked down at Ghost. The dog's eyes were already closing from exhaustion, but his nose remained pointed forward, past the ditch, deeper into the trees. "He was right," Emily whispered. Captain Reed called it in, voice low and exact. Their search was no longer a guess. It had weight now. It had direction. It had a child's shoe resting in a deputy's hand like a small, silent prayer. Briggs wanted to widen the search grid from that point, and under ordinary circumstances, he would have been right. But Ghost began to struggle weakly in Isaiah's arms, not away from him, but forward, as if the delay itself hurt. Isaiah tightened his hold. "Easy. I have you." Ghost's paw slid over Isaiah's sleeve and tapped once against his forearm. Then again. Then the rhythm came, faint but unmistakable. 3 quick touches. Too slow. Isaiah looked ahead. The trail split at an old fallen signpost, one path curving toward higher ground, the other dropping toward thicker woods where the fog gathered low and silver. Briggs unfolded his map again. Higher ground leads back toward the road. That would make more sense if she wandered. Ghost turned his head away from the higher path and stared into the fog. Emily swallowed. "He is choosing the low trail." Briggs shook his head, but softer this time. "That goes toward Blackwater Creek. It floods after heavy rain." Isaiah felt those words settle into him like stones. "Cold water. Low ground. Lily is cold." The phrase returned, with a force that made his jaw tighten. He shifted Ghost gently, making sure the sling supported him, then stepped toward the low trail. "We go where he points." Briggs looked at Captain Reed, and Reed gave one short nod. They moved on. The woods seemed to close around them with every step. Branches brushed against Isaiah's shoulders. Water dripped from pine needles onto the back of his neck. Ghost's breathing grew shallow, and Isaiah began counting it without meaning to, the way he had once counted seconds between radio calls overseas. In his mind, another child's name tried to rise from the place he kept buried, but he pushed it down, not because it did not matter, but because Lily mattered now. The past could not be rescued. This morning still could. They reached a narrow wooden footbridge slick with moss, half hidden beneath vines. It crossed a drainage channel where rainwater moved sluggishly below, brown and cold. Ghost lifted his head again, eyes suddenly alert. He did not look across the bridge. He looked beneath it. Isaiah stepped down the bank, careful in the mud, while Emily followed close behind. Under the bridge, tangled in a cluster of reeds, was the missing shoelace from the pink sneaker. Beside it, pressed into the wet earth beneath the shelter of the boards, were small handprints. Not old, not washed away. Small fingers had touched that mud recently. Emily covered her mouth with one hand, but she did not cry. Not yet. Briggs crouched near the prints, his voice barely above a whisper. She was here. Ghost gave a weak whine, then turned his nose downstream. The creek beyond the drainage channel curved east, toward land marked on the county map as an used storage property, a place of old sheds and private roads near Blackwater Creek. Briggs checked his radio again, frustration tightening his face when static answered. "We need more people out here." Captain Reed looked toward the low gray sky. "Then send coordinates when you get a signal. Until then, we keep moving." Isaiah climbed back to the trail with Ghost in his arms, his boots heavy with mud, his uniform damp through the sleeves, his breath steady but deep. The dog's body sagged more fully. Against him now, trust replacing strength. Isaiah bent his head close to Ghost's ear and spoke so softly that only the dog could hear. "You brought her this far. I am not stopping." Ghost's eyes opened just enough to meet his. There was no bark, no miracle burst of strength, only one small movement. His nose tilted east, toward the creek, toward the cold, toward the place where the trees thinned and the morning light looked strangely dim. And in that fragile gesture, Every person on that trail understood the same thing. The dog was no longer leading them away from the base. He was leading them back through the path he had already suffered, step by step, memory by memory, carrying them toward the one soul he had refused to leave behind. The creek pulled them forward like a thin, dark thread through the woods. It did not rush. It whispered over roots and stones, slipping beneath curtains of mist, winding east toward land that even Deputy Briggs seemed reluctant to name. Blackwater Creek had earned its reputation honestly. After heavy rain, the water rose without warning, spreading through the low pine flats and swallowing old paths until a man could stand ankle-deep in what looked like solid ground. Isaiah moved carefully, his boots finding purchase in the mud, Ghost held close against his chest, the white shepherd's nose still angled toward the unseen pull of memory. The dog's eyes were half open now, amber dimmed by exhaustion. Yet every time Isaiah slowed at the wrong bend, Ghost stirred, turned his muzzle, and corrected him with the faintest pressure of his head. Emily watched this from behind, her face pale with worry, one hand never far from the medical pack. "He is fading," she said softly. Isaiah did not turn around. "I know. If his breathing changes again, we stop. We stop when he tells us we are there." It was not defiance. It was faith, the difficult kind. The kind that walks through fog with no proof except the weight of a living creature in your arms. Captain Reed had moved ahead with one of the military police Marines, checking the path for safe footing. Briggs trailed near the creek, trying to raise dispatch as the signal came and went in broken. "Fragments. County units are shifting east," he said at last, lowering the radio. "They are trying to reach the old storage properties from the main road." Isaiah looked toward the trees. "How far?" Briggs checked the map, then the compass clipped to his vest. "Maybe 1.5 miles if the trail holds. Less as the crow flies. More if the creek is up." Ghost's ears twitched at the sound of the word creek. Then his palm moved against Isaiah's sleeve. Not the full signal this time. Just one weak scrape. The gesture struck Isaiah harder than any shout could have. Ghost was running out of strength. They found the first sign of the property near a rusted wire fence half swallowed by vines. A weather-beaten board hung crooked from one post, its painted warning faded almost white. "Private property. Keep out." Behind it, the trees thinned, revealing the outline of old service roads, rutted and slick, leading toward a cluster of low buildings hidden beyond a bend. Captain Reed raised a hand for silence. The team stopped. In the hush, the world seemed made only of dripping branches, distant water, and Ghost's fragile breathing. Emily stepped beside Isaiah and checked the dog's gums with gentle fingers. Her voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. "Isaiah, he needs warmth soon." Isaiah looked down at Ghost. Mud streaked the white fur along his neck, but the blue cloth and bracelet were still secured inside Emily's evidence pouch. The collar remained on him, worn and scratched, its metal plate coated with dirt. As Isaiah adjusted the blanket, a thin line of mud flaked away from the edge of the plate, revealing 2 letters and a number beneath the grime. RC-17. Isaiah stilled. "Emily." She followed his gaze. "What is that?" Briggs stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Let me see." Isaiah lifted the collar plate without pulling it from Ghost's neck. Briggs wiped it carefully with his thumb, revealing the mark more clearly. RC-17. For a moment, his face went blank with recognition. Then his mouth tightened. "Raymond Cole." Captain Reed turned. "Who is Raymond Cole?" Briggs looked toward the buildings beyond the trees. "He owned a private K9 training outfit a few years back. Rescue dogs, security dogs, contract work. Some of his animals went to law enforcement programs before he lost most of his licenses. There were complaints, missing records, unpaid bills, nothing that held long enough in court." Emily's voice went cold. "And RC-17? Could be an inventory mark." Briggs looked at Ghost now not as a stray, not as a mystery, but as a living record. If he came from Cole's place, that property ahead may still be connected. Isaiah felt Ghost stir at the name, not with fear exactly, but with recognition. The dog's body tensed, then weakened again, his muzzle pressing against Isaiah's jacket. Isaiah leaned close. "You knew this place." Ghost's eye opened. One small breath. One small turn of the nose toward the buildings. The truth began to assemble itself in the wet morning air. Ghost had not only carried Lily's message. He had carried a mark from the place that might have taken her. Briggs tried his radio again, voice controlled but urgent. "Dispatch, this is Briggs. We have a possible location tied to Raymond Cole, near Blackwater Creek Storage Road. Need units and medical support staged at the south access, but hold back until confirmed. Missing child evidence recovered along the creek path. Repeat, possible live recovery." Static chewed through half the words, but enough made it out. Enough for hope to start moving through the county in flashing lights and quiet prayers. Captain Reed studied the property line. "We go in carefully. No heroics. We are here for a child." Isaiah adjusted Ghost higher in his arms. "And for him." Reed's eyes softened for the briefest second. "For him too." They slipped through a gap in the fence where vines had pulled the wire loose. The ground changed beneath their boots, from soft forest mud to gravel mixed with weeds. Old tire tracks marked the lane, filled with rainwater the color of tarnished silver. A long shed stood ahead, its roof patched with mismatched metal, one side leaning slightly as if tired of holding secrets. Beside it sat a smaller building with boarded windows and a faded sign that once might have read Coastal Canine Services. The air smelled different here. Less pine, more damp wood, old straw, rust, and something closed away from sunlight. Ghost lifted his head suddenly. His whole body trembled. Not from cold alone. From nearness. Isaiah felt the change pass through him. "She is here," he whispered. Emily looked toward the buildings. Briggs lowered his radio. Captain Reed gave a silent hand signal, and the team moved forward, each step careful, each breath held. As they neared the long shed, Ghost made one sound, soft and broken, but clear enough to stop every heart around him. It was not a bark. It was the sound of recognition. Then, from somewhere inside the old building, beneath the rain and the creak of loose metal, came the faintest answer. 3 small knocks. Then silence. The 3 knocks did not sound like chance. They came from inside the long shed, faint and separated by a silence so deep it seemed to pull the whole morning toward it. Isaiah stood still in the rain, Ghost pressed against his chest, feeling the white shepherd's body go tense beneath the blanket. The dog had almost no strength left, yet his eyes opened wide at that sound, and for one fragile second the exhaustion disappeared beneath recognition. Captain Reed raised one hand, and every person stopped where they stood. No one called out. No one rushed the door. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but abandoned places have their own kind of warning. Loose metal siding tapped softly in the wind. Rainwater slid from the roof in silver threads. A broken gutter swung at one corner, creaking like an old screen door on a house nobody visited anymore. Deputy Briggs moved to the side window and peered through a crack between the boards. "No movement that I can see," he whispered. Emily stood close to Isaiah, her eyes fixed on Ghost. His heart is racing. Isaiah did not look down. He already felt it through his arms. He heard her. Reed motioned for the 2 military police Marines to check the side entrance while Briggs stayed with him at the front. Isaiah lowered Ghost carefully onto a folded tarp beneath the shallow overhang, keeping him out of the rain. The moment his paws touched the tarp, Ghost tried to rise. His legs trembled, failed, then tried again. Isaiah knelt in front of him and placed both hands along his shoulders. "Not alone," he whispered. "You do not have to do this alone anymore." Ghost stared past him toward the shed door. From inside came nothing now. Just dripping water. Just wood settling. Just the kind of silence that can make a man question what he heard. Then Ghost lifted one paw and touched Isaiah's wrist. 3 weak taps. 2 slower ones. Isaiah's throat tightened. He looked at Reed. "She is under something." Reed's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The signal changed earlier when he wanted direction. Now he is repeating after the knocks. 3 and 2. He is telling us where to listen. Briggs crouched by the front door, examining the latch. It is padlocked from the outside. Reed's voice stayed level. "Open it." Briggs used a bolt cutter from his vehicle kit, hands steady but fast. The lock fell into the wet grass with a dull thud. The door resisted at first, swollen from rain, then groaned inward, releasing the smell of damp wood, old straw, dust, and cold air that had not moved in too long. Reed entered first with a flashlight angled low. Briggs followed. Isaiah lifted Ghost again despite Emily's worried look, because the dog had earned the right to cross that threshold. Inside, the beam of light swept over stacked crates, empty feed bags, shelves lined with rusted tools, and old kennel panels leaning against the wall. Everything looked neglected, yet not forgotten. There were marks in the dust where something had recently been moved. A child's jacket hung on a nail near the back wall, pale yellow, one sleeve damp, the other caught against a splinter. Emily inhaled sharply. Briggs stepped toward it, but Isaiah stopped him with a soft command. Wait. Ghost had gone still. Not sleeping. Not fading. Listening. Isaiah turned slowly in place, letting Ghost's nose read the room. The shepherd's muzzle moved inch by inch, not toward the jacket, not toward the crates, but toward the center of the floor, where several old plywood sheets had been laid over the boards and weighed down with paint cans. Reed noticed the line of Isaiah's gaze. He moved closer and crouched. The flashlight caught shallow scratches along the edge of one plywood sheet. Not animal scratches. Not quite. Small marks, uneven, as if something from below had touched upward. Briggs whispered, "Dear God." Another sound came then, so faint it might have been a memory. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap. Emily covered her mouth, but her eyes did not leave the floor. Isaiah set Ghost down beside the plywood, supporting him with one hand. The dog lowered his nose to the edge and exhaled, a soft, trembling breath that fogged against the wood. Then he let out a sound Isaiah would never forget, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, broken whine filled with relief and sorrow. It was the sound of someone reaching home and finding the door still closed. Reed's voice turned firm. Move the cans. The military police Marines worked quickly, lifting the paint cans aside and pulling up the top sheets. Beneath them was a trapdoor, half hidden by dust, its metal ring recessed into the wood. Briggs grabbed it and pulled, but it stuck. Reed helped. The old hinges protested, then lifted with a sudden rush of colder air from below. Isaiah smelled it immediately. Damp earth. Stale wood. Creek water nearby. Emily moved forward with her flashlight and medical kit. At the bottom of a shallow storage space, curled on a folded tarp with her knees tucked to her chest, was Lily Parker. Small, shivering, alive. Her pink sock was muddy. Her hair clung to her forehead. One hand held a crumpled photograph against her chest, so tightly that even in exhaustion she would not let it go. Emily climbed down first, speaking in a voice softer than rain. Lily, my name is Emily. We are here to help you. The child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then frightened, then searching. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Isaiah leaned over the opening with Ghost in his arms, lowering the dog just enough for her to see the white fur and amber eyes. Lily's expression changed before any word arrived. Her fingers opened around the photograph. It showed a younger Ghost sitting beside her in a sunny backyard, his white coat clean, her small arms wrapped around his neck. Lily tried to lift her hand toward him. Ghost, with the last of whatever strength love had left him, stretched his muzzle down and touched her fingertips. The whole shed seemed to fall away then. The rain, the cold, the fear, the years Isaiah had carried inside him. For one breath, there was only a child, a dog, and a promise that had crawled through darkness until help finally understood. Isaiah carefully lifted Lily into his arms, keeping her close against the rain-soaked ground, while Ghost pressed his white muzzle into her small shoulder, trembling but unwavering in his watch. Emily moved beside them, checking the child for warmth, wrapping a spare thermal blanket around her shivering body, and brushing damp hair from her forehead. The smell of wet pine and old wood filled the space, mingling with the faint metallic scent of the creek nearby, creating a quiet, sharp clarity that seemed to center everything that had happened. Captain Reed surveyed the shed, making sure the scene was secure, while Briggs moved outside to mark the perimeter and maintain communication with county units. Ghost's amber eyes stayed fixed on Lily, lifting his head occasionally to glance at Isaiah as if seeking reassurance, then returning to watch the child. Every small breath Lily took was mirrored in Ghost's chest, a rhythm of shared survival and relief. The dampness of the shed had begun to chill the team, but the warmth that radiated from this reunion was heavier than the morning fog pressing against the windows. Lily's fingers tightened around the corner of the photograph she had held onto, pressing it against Ghost's muzzle. Isaiah rested his forehead lightly against Ghost's, feeling the rise and fall of the dog's chest, and in that moment, the years of service, missed chances, and quiet grief fell away, leaving only this fragile, living proof of endurance. Emily checked Lily's temperature and pulse, murmuring softly that she was stable, her small body responding to warmth and care, while the team remained close, forming a protective circle around the pair. Ghost finally laid down beside Isaiah, still alert, ears flicking at every subtle sound in the shed. The first light of sunrise filtered through the cracks in the roof, casting soft golden streaks across the floor, highlighting the white fur that had been muddied and soaked through the night. Isaiah allowed himself a slow breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to release as he traced his fingers along Ghost's back, careful not to disturb the dog's fragile state. Outside, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle, and the sound of distant water running over rocks mixed with the soft call of birds beginning their morning. Emily spoke gently to Lily, guiding her to lean against Isaiah and Ghost, providing comfort and a semblance of safety in a space that had only known fear and cold before this moment. Captain Reed nodded once, quietly acknowledging the rescue had gone according to plan, yet the weight of the morning's events lingered in the tight lines of his face, the pause in his voice, the steadying of his own breath. Ghost shifted slightly, nudging Lily with his nose, eliciting the first small smile of recognition from her tired eyes. The photograph she clutched now seemed less a memory and more a bridge, connecting the past to this immediate, tangible safety. Isaiah adjusted the blanket around both Lily and Ghost, tucking the edges so that warmth could be held, and for the first time in hours, he allowed his eyes to lift and take in the scene fully. The shed, damp and dimly lit, had become a space of quiet triumph. The fear that had filled it just moments before replaced by attentive care, calm breathing, and the steady presence of those who would not let harm reach this child again. Ghost rested his head against Lily's chest, lifting a paw to touch Isaiah's arm once, twice, a faint signal of trust and completion. Emily whispered reassurances to the child, soothing her with soft, steady words while keeping one hand near Ghost, maintaining the fragile balance of their recovery. Isaiah, kneeling beside them, felt the full weight of the moment, a culmination of instinct, loyalty, and human perseverance. Beyond the walls of the shed, the morning grew lighter, the mist lifting slightly as the sun began to rise over the distant pines, casting long, soft shadows across the forest floor. Each person in the team remained in place, silent, letting the moment hold, allowing the recovery, the reunion, and the realization that Ghost's determination had not only carried a message but had led them to Lily herself, be felt fully. There was no cheering, no loud relief, only the slow, deep settling of hearts and the soft sounds of life continuing, fragile, steadfast, and remarkably alive. Isaiah placed a hand on Ghost's shoulder once more, a simple gesture, a quiet acknowledgement that what had begun with a message tied to a collar had ended in presence, in safety, and in the kind of grace that comes silently, without fanfare, through acts of unwavering loyalty. By the time the county ambulance reached the south access road, the rain had become little more than silver dust drifting through the pines. Lily was carried out wrapped in 2 blankets, her small hand still reaching backward until Isaiah stepped beside the stretcher with Ghost cradled carefully against his chest. The white shepherd was too weak to walk, but when Lily saw him, her fingers relaxed, and her breathing settled into a softer rhythm. Emily rode with them, one hand monitoring Lily, the other resting lightly on Ghost's side, as if she could keep both hearts steady by touch alone. Isaiah followed in the vehicle behind, silent, his uniform damp, his boots caked with Black Creek mud, his hands still remembering the weight of the dog and the child. The road back toward Camp Lejeune seemed shorter in daylight, but it carried a different heaviness now, the kind that comes after a miracle when everyone begins to understand how close they came to losing it. At the base clinic, warm lights glowed against the gray morning. Lily was moved to a private treatment room until her mother arrived from the county staging area, and Ghost was placed on a padded bed near her door, wrapped in clean towels that made his white fur look almost luminous beneath the lamp. He slept only when Lily was close enough to see. If the door shifted, his eyes opened. If Lily stirred, his ears moved. If Isaiah stood, Ghost watched him until the Marine sat back down. Around noon, Lily's mother arrived with a sound that was not quite A cry and not quite a prayer. She knelt beside her daughter and held her gently, rocking in place while Lily whispered only one word at first. Ghost. Emily looked to Isaiah, and Isaiah lifted the dog carefully, bringing him close enough for Lily's hand to rest against his head. Ghost leaned into that touch with all the strength he had left, his eyes closing as if the whole long night had finally ended there, in the warmth of a child's palm. No one in the room spoke for a while. Captain Reed stood by the wall, hat in hand, his face composed but his eyes shining in a way he did not try to hide. Deputy Briggs remained near the doorway, staring at the floor, then at the evidence bag containing the blue cloth, the purple bracelet, and the scratched collar plate. His voice was low when he finally spoke. We almost searched the wrong direction. Isaiah looked at Ghost. He did not. That afternoon, the reports would begin. County units would secure the old property. Investigators would follow the records tied to Raymond Cole and the Forgotten Canine program. People would ask questions, gather statements, and piece together how a frightened child and a faithful dog had been hidden from the world by distance, weather, and neglect. But inside that clinic room, the official story did not matter yet. What mattered was simpler. Lily was warm. Ghost was breathing. Isaiah was still there. As evening settled over the base, the clouds finally broke, and a clean gold light fell through the clinic window, spreading across the floor until it reached Ghost's bed. Lily had been moved to a proper hospital for observation, but before she left, she made Isaiah promise that Ghost would not wake up alone. He gave her his word without hesitation. So he stayed. He sat in the chair beside the dog, elbows on his knees, dog tags resting against his chest, listening to the soft beep of monitors and the distant cadence of Marines drilling somewhere beyond the walls. For years, silence had been a room Isaiah entered alone. It had held names he could not save, places he could not revisit, and a younger version of himself still standing in dust, asking for one more chance. But that night, silence changed shape. It held the sound of Ghost sleeping. It held the memory of Lily's fingers brushing white fur. It held the truth that grace does not always arrive loud enough for the world to notice. Sometimes it drags itself through rain. Sometimes it wears a worn collar. Sometimes it brings a message because love refuses to stop moving. Near sunset, Ghost opened his eyes. Isaiah leaned forward at once. Hey, partner. Ghost gave a tired blink, then lifted one paw just enough to touch Isaiah's wrist. Not 3 taps. Not 2. Just 1. Enough. Isaiah covered the paw with his hand, careful and still. Captain Reed appeared quietly in the doorway. You saved them, he said. Isaiah did not answer right away. He looked at the dog, at the clean bandages, at the fading mud on his own boots, at the last line of sunlight warming the floor. Then he shook his head softly. No, sir. He came to save all of us. Reed let the words stand. Outside, the flag moved gently in the coastal wind, and the base settled into evening with a peace that felt earned. Ghost rested his head against Isaiah's boot and closed his eyes again, no longer guarding a message, no longer fighting the cold, no longer carrying the whole weight of hope by himself. And Isaiah stayed beside him until the room grew quiet, understanding at last that some souls do not crawl through darkness because they are lost. They crawl through darkness because someone they love is still waiting for the light.